Welcome, brave viewers, to the Spooky Channel, your gateway to the eerie and enigmatic realms that exist beyond the mundane world. Join us as we delve into the most mysterious and ominous corners of our planet, unearthing secrets and uncovering chilling stories that will send shivers down your spine. They say the only way to advance fast in science is through unethical procedures. It may sound right at first, but all empathy you associate with this will quickly erode once you hear these 4 real-life human experiment stories. So brace yourselves. The curious case of Graham Young. Living just outside of London in the 1960s, Graham Young was a scrawny teenager who hated life. His father sent him to live with his aunt after his mother died of tuberculosis when he was less than 3 months old. When Graham's father remarried and took him back, he hated his new stepmother more than anyone he had ever hated before. His lack of affection later allowed him to experiment on his family and countless others without feeling any pity or remorse. Graham received a chemistry kit and spent most of his time alone studying his 2 favorite subjects, chemistry and Nazi history. No doubt Nazi experiments inspired him to go on multiple poisoning sprees soon after. His first victim was his only childhood friend, Christopher Williams, whom he poisoned with sandwiches at lunchtime. Christopher began vomiting, having severe headaches, running a fever, and missing school from feeling exhausted. Graham continued to poison Christopher, but it wasn't often enough to satisfy his sick urges. He needed test subjects he could constantly monitor, so he put a poison into family meals, only poisoning certain sections of the meal and saving the untainted pieces for himself. Graham charmed local chemists to get hold of the poison he needed, sometimes convincing them that he was a college student to access a steady supply. The poison he used was called antimony, which caused hair loss and kills nerve endings. Graham's victims experienced numbness that started in the fingers and progressed into hot shooting pains throughout the body. He kept detailed logs the entire time as his family became sicker and sicker. Graham especially targeted his stepmother, Molly, over the course of a year, giving her small doses to torture her stomach and took enormous pleasure in her suffering. In April 1962, his father discovered Molly rolling around in pain in the garden, and Graham watched the scene unfold with no emotion. At the hospital, doctors couldn't understand Molly's symptoms and she died hours later. Graham continued to torture his family further with more poison and keeping detailed logs. His father and sister would eventually have permanent liver damage from his cruelty. Graham began to especially focus on his father's misery, even though his father had never especially wronged him. Graham was arrested after his chemistry teacher found the poison he used in his desk during class, and he was sentenced to 15 years at Broadmoor Psychiatric Facility at the age of 14. And during his stay, he used soap and anything else he could find to poison those around him. He even extracted cyanide from a laurel bush to kill one inmate. After confessing to murder, the staff listed it as a suicide, but Graham eventually convinced the staff he was rehabilitated and was released at the age of 23. Game changer. In World War II, Japan had a cunning plan to win by utilizing banned biological weapons. A bioweapon research unit named Unit 731 was created to conduct inhumane experiments on prisoners of war. The experiments were so gruesome that they've recorded some of the worst in human history. At first, the unit pretended to help combat disease, but in reality, they were conducting atrocities. One day, 40 doctors were taken to a prison and forced to remove bullets from the stomachs of prisoners without anesthesia. Some doctors were practicing battlefield amputations, while others were cutting into their windpipes while still alive. The prisoners were literally being ripped apart. In other experiments, human test subjects were left outside in freezing weather with their limbs exposed, while guards would pour freezing water on them to quicken the process of frostbite. The atrocities committed by Unit 731 during the war knew no bounds. Victims who couldn't endure the trauma of losing a limb were condemned to perish from illnesses or freeze to death. Ceramic bombs, cluster bombs, and bombs laced with fleas infected with deadly plagues were mercilessly tested on human subjects. The unfortunate captives were tied to stakes and subjected to the ferocity of the bombs at varying blast radii. Those who survived the initial blast were hung on poles to shriek and plead, left to suffer until their injuries proved fatal. In their ceaseless pursuit of victory, the Unit 731 researchers didn't hesitate to deploy an airplane loaded with anthrax, plague, cholera, and other lethal contaminants to rain death over villages and towns. They would then analyze the corpses of the decimated communities to ascertain the most lethal weapons. This cruel experimentation is thought to have caused the deaths of between 300 and 580,000 individuals. Unit 731 even planned to unleash plague-infected pilots on America to spread disease and death under the cover of darkness in a mission dubbed Cherry Blossoms at Night. Fortunately, the plan was never executed. When the war ended, Unit 731 desperately attempted to erase all evidence of their heinous actions. The prisoners were massacred with poisonous gas and machine gun fire, and the survivors were thrown in the river to drown. The unit made sure that no one was left alive to tell the tale. CIA understanding LSD. Colorful hallucinations and intense thought patterns were just the beginning. Acid, better known as LSD, was the American government's dirty little secret. In the early 1950s, the CIA conducted their own LSD research on the unsuspecting public with the ultimate goal of mind control. They called it MK Ultra, and they were relentless in their pursuit of the perfect truth serum, the ultimate mind wipe, the ultimate way to make people obey. Operation Midnight Climax was the crown jewel in the CIA's twisted arsenal. They spared no expense in creating brothels in San Francisco and New York, where unsuspecting clients were lured in by the promise of pleasure and ecstasy. Little did they know their drinks were spiked with LSD, a psychedelic drug that would send them spiraling into the world of colorful hallucinations and intense thought patterns. The CIA watched everything unfold through one-way mirrors, enjoying their power over these helpless individuals. They recorded every moment, every sound, and every thought that crossed their minds. To the agency, it was all in the name of science. But the twisted experimentation didn't stop there. The CIA was obsessed with perfecting their mind control techniques, and government infiltration became their next target. Under the guise of activists, CIA agents infiltrated various groups and spiked their drinks with LSD to study their reactions. They wanted to know how these groups would behave under the influence of the powerful drug, and they didn't care about the consequences. To make their methods even more effective, the agency turned to professional magicians to teach them the art of slipping LSD into someone's drink undetected. They wanted to be able to drug anyone, anywhere, at any time, and get away with it. And they did. From the time the last CIA outpost was quietly closed in 1964, thousands of people had been forced to take psychedelic drugs against their will, all at the taxpayers' expense, of course. The CIA loves LSD and they're not afraid to use it. For science. Bob Berdella, who went by the name The Scientific Sadist, owned a store called Bob's Bizarre Bazaar, a haven of oddities that brought some much-needed culture to the dreary city of Kansas. Despite his strange behavior and repulsive odor, Berdella believed himself to be an upstanding person. However, the reality of his private life was far more twisted and gruesome than any of the bizarre items he sold in his store. Berdella lured a drug addict to his house, bound and tortured him with electrocution, beatings, injections of Drano, and bleach in the eyes. He kept a journal of his twisted acts, finding pleasure in relieving them. He was linked to most of the 47 missing persons between 1984 and 1988. Berdella kept the victim drugged and bound for days until he escaped by burning the ropes and falling into an area without guard dogs. A real estate agent hired to evaluate the worth of Berdella's home was horrified to find massive guard dogs in cages, unsettling paintings of screaming people, and a kitchen with two large stainless steel tables in the center for dismembering bodies. One of the tables had an industrial-grade garbage disposal, which no ordinary person would have a use for. Berdella died of a heart attack in prison in 1992, leaving behind a gruesome legacy that continues to haunt those who were unfortunate enough to cross his path. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the macabre and terrifying world of horror and mystery. Keep in touch with us here on the Spooky Channel by liking and subscribing, and also hit that notification bell. We hope that our videos have kept you on the edge of your seat and made your heart race with fear.